Autumn is fast arriving. That will be followed by winter. But that doesn't mean to say that the harvests have to stop. Today, we should look at what you can be growing in this polytunnel space to give you harvests during the coldest months of the year, so that you can be enjoying fresh, homegrown harvests through the winter months and into next spring. Now you look at this polytunnel now, it's full of our summer crops, and there's still plenty to come. Everything is starting to turn its colour, and we still have another 6 weeks or so of growing time for all of these wonderful tomatoes and aubergines and cucumbers. In the greenhouse there are the peppers and the chili peppers. We've still even got watermelons and melons to come. So there's lots still to go on here, but the time is approaching fast when all of this will need to change. Now, I've had several comments over the last 2 or 3 videos asking me, what can we be growing in an undercover space? John was one such person, and I said, yep, we're currently working on a video that we should be putting out there, and this is indeed that video. So if you have your own personal ideas about what you'll be growing in your undercover spaces, maybe you think that it's not worth commenting on a video, do make sure you do, because actually it very often helps myself and Mrs. W to formulate a video subject that we're going to talk about. We had several comments about what to grow in an undercover space over winter, and those comments have fueled this video. It's often said that a polytunnel can extend the growing season by 6 weeks, and of course, depending on where you live in the world will depend what those 6 weeks are like. Now, I can tell you here, we grow in Zone 9A here in Norfolk in the United Kingdom. Our first average frost will be mid-November. So let's just think about that, mid-November. If we count 6 weeks on from that, it actually takes us to the end of the year, right to the very end of December. We can actually be harvesting things out of this polytunnel. And with the things that we will also plant in here to overwinter, that then gives us harvests into next spring. Polytunnels are like microclimates. They'll keep the worst of the weather off. Can they freeze? Can a greenhouse freeze? Of course it can. But it won't freeze quite like it does outside. And that's why we can still get great harvest in this space all through the year, basically. But like everything that we do in our garden, it requires planning. It requires the right varieties. And of course, more than anything in a garden, it requires the right timing. We shall start with the Alliums. Now, in a polytunnel, you can grow your overwintering onions. Of course, it is possible to grow them outside, but what I do find is that they become ready earlier when they're grown undercover. They don't take up too much space because we multi-sow them, and they only need about 50 or 60 onions at that time, and they will be able to have those harvests, and they'll just see us through with onions until our new season main crop onions have actually been harvested, cured and are ready for us to use. They just need a couple of months out of these overwintering onions. Along with our overwintering onions, we always like to put some salad onions in here. Now, salad onions that we sowed, you saw us sow them not that long ago, along with the onions. So, you know, these things have already been sown. With the salad onions that we grow outside, they will overwinter and give us harvests next year in late March through April, May, and if there's enough of them, even into June. And we always like to try and transplant some in here and in the greenhouse so that we have those harvests this side of the new year. As well as salad onions, the other allium that we like to sow undercover is our garlic. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had quite severe rust problems with our garlic when they're grown outside, much like you see on the leeks. And what we do find is that when we grow our garlic undercover, we see less of the rust problem. When garlic is grown undercover, it's normally ready right at the beginning of June and not the end of June and into July like it often is outside. That means that the rust is not rife. It's not quite there yet. Whereas outdoors, it does. Once you get to the second half of June, that's when you can often see the worst of the rust. And what the rust can do with garlic in particular is it can slow down the growth, and you don't get the large bulbs or heads that you really want, especially if it gets it early, you know, around 2 months before you want to be harvesting it. It will really slow up its growth and the size that it gets. Whereas in here, you don't see so much of it because it arrives just a little bit later than the beginning of June, and it will complete its full growth cycle. Now this year, myself and Mrs. W are actually going to grow some more garlic outside. We haven't done it for 3 seasons now, so we're going to see just what happens when we grow the garlic outside. We can measure it against what we are growing undercover. So, if you want to see exactly how that goes and make decisions for yourselves, then do make sure you are subscribed to the channel, and you'll see just what it is, the garlic in the polytunnel versus the garlic outside. Now you may be wondering why I'm talking a great deal about the polytunnel. That's because the truth of the matter is myself and Mrs. W have some maintenance that we need to do in the greenhouse. So actually nothing this season will be grown in the greenhouse. Everything will be done in here. Next, we shall look at the salads and the greens. Now, in our last video, you saw us sow some, well, you saw Mrs. W sow some cut and come again lettuce and some rocket, and they're going to be grown in containers, and that's really great because we can keep them outside and then move them undercover as time goes on. And they're a cut and come again, so you can just keep harvesting and then they come again, but of course they will eventually cease to grow. So you can continue to keep sowing into your containers and then just move them into your polytunnel where they will continue to grow very nicely. But also during the month of September, and particularly for spinach, if you make a sowing right at the very end of August, beginning of September, then you can actually transplant them into your polytunnel or greenhouse as and when all of these crops are removed, and they will give you harvests, small harvests, up until the weather gets really cold. And then as we get into the new year and arrive into February, the weather warms up, the daylight becomes a little bit longer, then you get really great harvests. Also in September, towards the end of September, we shall be sowing hardy lettuces, which are amazing. We tend to favour the types of Winter Density and Arctic King. There is also a Winter Gem. All of these are hardy, and especially when they're sown under cover. And let me tell you folks, when we get to the festive season, there's a lot of rich food around that you're enjoying. It's absolutely amazing, but it's also nice to have something a little bit healthy and just give the tummy a little time to relax in the form of a nice salad. We've already talked about salad onions and these winter density and Arctic King. They'll provide you a nice crispy crunchy leaves that you can harvest from them. The idea is that you grow 1 or 2. You don't just want to grow 3 or 4, you know. Try and get up to 10 in there in your space. And then, because things grow really quite slowly at that time of the year, you can just take the leaves from the outer edges of the plant and enjoy those, and then they will grow back again slowly, and then, you know, in a week or two's time you can go back and take some more harvests of those. Next we look at the roots. Now you can actually grow in your polytunnel things like carrots, but what I have found is that the best time to actually sow your carrots is round about now. But you can see we've still got lots of summer crops in here. I don't really have the space to make the drills and make rows to actually grow the carrots. We have done that before, but it was quite difficult. We had to jiggle things around. Wasn't really a desirable way to do it. But what I have found, and as you saw Mrs. W doing in our last video, she sowed some carrots into our containers. That's great. They can be out there and take advantage of the light that's still there and the warmth. They'll germinate and get going. And as the weather gets cooler, as we head into sort of mid to late October, we can actually move those containers and bring them into our polytunnel. They'll continue to grow away, and the ones that we sowed last month, they will give us harvest in December and January. But actually, if you sow 2 or 3, 4 or 5 containers, they'll just keep in there and you can enjoy them in through January and February. We also sowed some turnips during August, and I've got those out there. Well, in fact, they're just germinating, so I will transplant them out into the outdoor plots, and they'll work really just fine. But I do want to see if I can have turnips a little bit later into the year. So again, they're another crop that you can actually sow in September, and you can transplant them into your polytunnel or greenhouse, and they'll grow away nicely, and you'll have some harvests a bit later on in the autumn. They'll take over from the ones that you've got outside. The great thing about turnips is that they're multi-sown. They don't take up a huge amount of space, so they've got to a size where they can be transplanted out. Before you've removed these, you can just dot them in between your tomatoes, melons, whatever you're growing in your undercover spaces, and they'll be fine. Next we look at beetroots. Now beetroot you can make an very early, so right in the first week of September, so they get a chance to grow on. Self and Mrs. W, we actually sowed some about 2 weeks ago, and they're sort of up here now. They've germinated really well. And again, just like the turnips, you can dot them in between the plants you already have in there should you need to. Otherwise, just let them carry on growing. So long as they're transplanted at the time and on the same day when you remove all of these summer crops, they'll already be this big, and that means that they're well established, and they will go on to provide much smaller beetroots at the back end of the year. They won't be the big ones that you'll get, or that we'll certainly get, from our June sowings that are actually out in our outdoor plots. But that doesn't matter, just to have those lovely small tender beetroot, they'll be absolutely amazing at that time of the year. And then radish. Now, you can grow winter radish, and sown in the first half of September, you'll get some really nice harvest from them. Myself and Mrs. W, we haven't had too much luck with that, but we are going to try some this year. But what I do like to do is to get some of the old favourites like French breakfast. Only rather than putting them into the soil, again, I shall put them into containers. And there's something you want to sow right at the beginning of September. Last year we didn't sow them until October. And although we had some very tiny radishes, we wouldn't consider those as successful, would we?
No.
But by making a September sowing, they have that little bit longer to actually establish themselves. And all of these things that we're talking about sowing, what it's going to mean is that, you know, all through the autumn, and indeed, it's lovely when we're having the festive season that you can have all of these come together and you can get some really lovely salads going, even at that time of the year. No going to the supermarket, not getting second-rate veg, but having some beautiful, beautiful home harvested vegetables. You can successfully grow brassicas in your polytunnel over the autumn and winter period, and they fall into two categories really. In September, if you sow some kale, you will get harvest from that kale this side of the new year. You can also sow things like cabbages, spring cabbages in particular, and they will get themselves going, establish themselves, and then you'll have that harvest round about February in the new year. That's the great thing about the polytunnel or an undercover growing space. You get them that little bit earlier. In the outside plots where I put our spring cabbage, we probably won't be able to pick those until round about March, and then we'll let some go on to head up and make a heart. But we won't see that until May. But what we will get is those that little bit earlier if you grow them undercover. If you've got things like Calabrese, or you've got some cabbages like we have, and some cauliflower that you had more than enough to put out into your outdoor plots, you can actually transplant those into there. But it is a good idea if, like us, you have some left over, and you can see here they're quite large plants now. They're starting to get quite big. So just pop them on and just keep them going. They'll continue to grow and they'll be a nice size. And then when you do remove all of these summer plants out of your undercover growing spaces, you can then pop those into the ground. Now, the difference with these is that they will get themselves established and they'll get quite nice plants. And then they will go on to give you a harvest in the very early spring next year, which will give you a head start, which is really quite nice to actually have something like a Calabrese broccoli, let's say in maybe late April or May. Ooh, get those harvests just before next year's summer plantings go into your undercover growing spaces. As for now, we still have much to harvest in here, and we're another 6 weeks away before we actually change this polytunnel over to crops that will grow in the autumn and over winter. But a little bonus one for you here. If you've been following our channel for some time, you'll know that over the last couple of seasons I've actually dug up one of our, or a couple of our celery plants, and I've moved them into the polytunnel, and that's worked really well. We've had many more pickings of celery between sort of October and around about February, March time, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But I'm not keen on actually digging at any time. If I can avoid it, I will. And what Mrs. W did do, she actually transplanted some celery into one of our 30-litre containers. You can see it here. It's actually giving us harvest already. If we can't actually be bothered to walk up the garden to the ones that are in our plots, then we just go to that and pick a stick of that celery to add for flavouring to the recipes that we cook. So what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to move that 30-litre container up to this polytunnel. No need to dig, no need to make big holes and put something in from outside into there. We just managed to keep it watered, keep it well watered, because celery does love that, and it'll continue to give us lovely harvests. And the other thing is that where you see these empty hooks, earlier on in the season we had our hanging baskets with strawberries in. They're actually the other side of this polytunnel. We removed them out once the tomatoes started to get big and needed the space. But they shall actually come back into here and overwinter to give us a nice early strawberry harvest next year. And when it comes to growing vegetables undercover over winter, here's a few tips for you. First of all, clearly you need to remove everything that's in here, and you want to be mulching your beds with your compost. For us, we do this once a year, and that is October. Once these are come out, it gets its annual mulch of compost, and then that will grow both the overwintering vegetables but also these amazing summer crops that you can see here in our polytunnel. The next thing is give it a good wash. Make sure it's clean on the outside and the inside. If you wash it on the inside, it's going to help get rid of some of the overwintering pests that are about. And also by doing the outside, it will let the maximum amount of light into your tunnel or your greenhouse, so that these vegetables can capitalize on whatever light is available. So we're really lucky with our tunnel in that we have the sides that actually roll up, and we have mesh there that can keep it well ventilated. Even with the door closed, the door also has a mesh cover so that we can let the air still flow through. You might not have that, and indeed sometimes November can still be really quite warm for us, can't it? It can have summer temperatures of sort of 12 or 14 degrees, so we'll want to leave the door open. And if you are growing brassicas in here and it is a mild autumn, you want to just cover them in the same way that you do outside, with some mesh, so that those white cabbage butterflies don't fly in here and lay their eggs. Otherwise, you won't be getting any crops. As we move into December, January and February, of course, I've said before, earlier in this video, undercover spaces can still freeze. It might not be as harsh as the ones outside, but they can still freeze. And if you can see on your weather forecast that it's going to be particularly cold, and think, hello, it's going to happen in the undercover spaces, it's a good idea just to fleece your plants, just to give them that bit more protection. When it comes to watering your vegetables that are overwintering in your polytunnel, it's a completely different thing to do than when you're growing in the summer. Let your finger be the best guide. If you put it into the soil and it's still nice and damp, you don't need to water. It takes a bit more working out when to water and when not to water. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to that stage later on in the year. And if you've not quite done this before and you're going to give it a go for the first time, do make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, and then that way you won't miss a video when we talk about a watering regime for winter undercover spaces. You'll have the best advice that we can give you. And then lastly, ventilation. I mentioned earlier that we have sides that roll up, so we have mesh, and also on the door. But some of you might not, and indeed in our greenhouse, if we were going to be growing in there over this year, it doesn't have that facility. And you'll be amazed just how warm it can get in an undercover space. When the sun comes out in the middle of winter, it can really get quite warm in here. So don't forget to open your windows, leave the door open, get some good ventilation in here. The last thing you want is mildew taking hold, because that will ultimately end up rotting your plants. Plants do need good ventilation. Just as they do in summer, they also need that in winter. Growing vegetables undercover over winter does not need to be complicated. Indeed, by selecting the right varieties and a bit of planning, you can successfully have harvests all through the autumn, winter months, and indeed into next spring. And with that planning and the right varieties, you'll get your harvests, and by the time we get to early May next year, you'll have a nice blank canvas again, where you can plant all of these amazing plants once again. There is no need to let this space just lay here. It's valuable growing space. It's valuable to you. If you're like myself and Mrs. W, you want to be able to feed yourself all year round, don't forget these spaces. Utilise them. Do what you can. Grow what you can, and like us, you'll be able to enjoy fresh pickings all the way through autumn, winter and spring. Now, clearly a polytunnel is an investment, but it's a very good investment, and it's one of those things that once you've bought it, it really doesn't take too long before it's paid itself back. And if you're thinking about maybe, I'd like a polytunnel, and you want to see how they go up and the sort of preparation that you will need to do before that tunnel goes up, then watch this video next.